My name is Abigail Mitchell, and I'm 32 years old. I spent my entire life trying to be the perfect daughter, only to discover I was never good enough. 1 week after my parents died in a car accident, I sat in their lawyer's office as he read their will. The room spun when I heard they'd left almost everything to my cousin Rachel, the same cousin they always called the daughter they never had. Right in front of me, their actual daughter. Before I tell you how I discovered the shocking truth behind my parents' decision, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. If you've ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted completely, this story might help you heal. I grew up in a spacious colonial house in suburban Connecticut. 5 bedrooms, a manicured lawn, and a kitchen where my mother hosted dinner parties that were the envy of the neighborhood. The house was beautiful, but perfection came with a price. Every detail mattered to my parents, Harold and Eleanor Mitchell. Dad worked as an investment banker at a prestigious firm in New York City. He commuted an hour and a half each way, leaving before sunrise and returning after I was in bed most weeknights. When he was home, he divided his attention between checking the financial news, critiquing my homework, and reminding me that Mitchells excel at everything they do. Mom owned an art gallery in town that showcased up-and-coming artists. She had an eye for talent and a knack for sales that made her gallery the most successful in the county. Her perfectionism extended to everything, from the symmetrical arrangement of flowers in our foyer to the expectations she had for me. Stand up straight, Abigail. That B+ in chemistry isn't going to get you into a top college, Abigail. Couldn't you have found a more flattering dress for the dance, Abigail? No matter what I achieved, it never seemed to be enough. I graduated high school with a 3.9 GPA, not perfect, but close. Mom focused on the 1B that prevented me from being valedictorian. I earned a full academic scholarship to a respected state university. Dad wondered aloud why I hadn't aimed for an Ivy League school like Rachel. Ah, Rachel. My cousin who entered our lives like a hurricane when I was 12 years old. Rachel was Aunt Margaret's daughter. Her father died when she was 8, a tragic heart attack at 42. Aunt Margaret struggled financially after Uncle David's death, which was why my parents started inviting Rachel to visit regularly. At first, I was excited to have someone close to my age around. My younger brother James was only 10 then, and mainly interested in video games and avoiding our parents' scrutiny. Rachel was 2 years older than me. At 14, she was already poised, articulate, and academically gifted. She arrived that first weekend with a stack of books and a quiet confidence I immediately envied. "Eleanor, thank you so much for having me," she said, hugging my mother with just the right amount of affection. "Your home is absolutely beautiful." I watched my mother's face light up with pleasure. "We're so happy to have you, dear. Abigail could learn a thing or two from your manners." That was the beginning. What started as occasional weekend visits became regular extended stays. Rachel joined us for all major holidays, most family vacations, and even random Tuesday dinners. She fit into our family like a missing puzzle piece, the piece my parents had apparently been searching for all along. The favoritism was subtle at first, then increasingly blatant as years passed. When Rachel got straight A's in her advanced classes, my parents proudly displayed her report card on our refrigerator, right next to mine with its mix of A's and B's. When I won second place in the regional debate tournament, everyone celebrated until Rachel mentioned she'd been accepted to a prestigious summer program at Columbia University. The conversation immediately shifted, my trophy forgotten. "Tell us more about the program, Rachel. Will you be living on campus, Rachel? This will look wonderful on your college applications, Rachel." I tried not to be jealous. Rachel had lost her father, after all. She deserved support and encouragement. But as the pattern continued year after year, resentment burrowed deep inside me like a splinter that couldn't be removed. My brother James noticed too. 2 years younger than me, he was even further removed from our parents' attention. While Rachel and I competed for approval, James retreated into himself, spending more time with friends whose parents didn't measure success in perfect report cards and extracurricular achievements. "They don't even see us," he said once when we were teenagers, after a particularly Rachel-centric Thanksgiving dinner. It's like we're extras in the Rachel show. I should have talked to my parents about how I felt, but whenever I tried, the conversation went nowhere. Mom, do you realize you haven't asked me about my internship, but you've spent 20 minutes hearing about Rachel's summer job? Don't be ridiculous, Abigail. And frankly, I'm disappointed in your jealousy. Rachel has had a difficult life. You should be more understanding. Eventually, I stopped trying to compete for their approval. I built walls around my heart and focused on creating a life that would take me far away from Connecticut and the constant reminder of my inadequacy. As soon as I graduated college, I moved to Boston, determined to succeed on my own terms, without my parents' approval or financial support. But even then, Rachel's shadow followed me home for every holiday and family gathering. The golden cousin who could do no wrong, who somehow became more their child than I ever was. My teenage years became an exercise in futility, trying to earn approval that always seemed reserved for Rachel. While I struggled with calculus, spending hours with a tutor to maintain AB+, Rachel effortlessly scored perfect marks. My parents hired her to tutor me, creating the humiliating scenario of my cousin explaining derivatives at our kitchen table while my parents looked on admiringly. See how Rachel breaks down the problem, Abigail? It's really not that difficult if you apply yourself. What they never noticed was how Rachel would subtly undermine me during these sessions. She'd explain concepts using terminology she knew I didn't understand, then give exasperated sighs when I asked for clarification. When I finally grasped something, she'd say, "Well, that's the easy part. Let's see if you can handle something more challenging." She was building herself up by tearing me down, and my parents were her unwitting accomplices. The college application process highlighted the disparity in our treatment. Rachel applied to 7 prestigious universities, including Harvard, Yale, and Stanford. My parents paid her application fees without hesitation. When I prepared to apply to similar schools, my father sat me down for a realistic conversation. "Abigail, I don't want to see you disappointed. Your test scores and extracurriculars are good, but not Ivy League caliber. State schools have excellent programs too, and they're more affordable. Translation: we don't want to waste money on application fees for schools you won't get into. We're not confident enough in your abilities to invest in your future the way we invest in Rachel's." Rachel got into Harvard with a partial scholarship. My parents threw her an elaborate celebration dinner, inviting extended family and their closest friends. They gave her a brand new laptop, a professional wardrobe for college, and promised to cover all expenses her scholarship didn't. I received acceptance letters from 3 state universities and 1 private college that offered me a substantial merit scholarship. My parents acknowledged this with a brief congratulations and a discussion about student loans. "We can help a little, of course," Mom said, "but you'll need to take out loans and work part-time. It builds character." Meanwhile, Rachel didn't have to work during college. She could focus entirely on her studies and unpaid prestigious internships that built her resume. I worked 20 hours a week at a campus coffee shop while maintaining a full course load. During summers, I took extra classes and worked full-time to minimize my debt. Rachel spent her summers at enrichment programs and international travel experiences, all subsidized by my parents. Rachel's studying art history in Florence this summer, my mother announced proudly at Easter dinner my sophomore year. "How wonderful," Aunt Margaret said, though I noticed she looked uncomfortable. "That's very generous of you, Eleanor." "It's an investment in her future," my father replied. "These experiences will shape her career." I bit my tongue to keep from asking why my future didn't warrant similar investment. James opted to attend college in California, as far from our family dynamic as possible. When he announced his decision, my parents seemed more concerned about how they would explain his choice to their friends than about how rarely they would see their son. "UCLA is certainly a good school," Dad said with a tight smile, "but wouldn't you prefer something on the East Coast? You'd be closer to home." "That's exactly why I chose California," James replied bluntly. I envied his courage to break away completely. I had chosen Boston, far enough for independence but close enough to maintain the family relationship I still desperately wanted to fix. During one Thanksgiving break my junior year, I finally gathered the courage to address the favoritism directly. Rachel was spending the holiday with her boyfriend's family, giving me a rare opportunity to speak without her presence. "Mom, Dad, I need to talk to you about something that's been bothering me for years." They exchanged glances across the dining room table. "What is it, Abigail?" Mom asked. "I feel like you favor Rachel over me and James. You give her opportunities and support you've never given us. You celebrate her accomplishments more enthusiastically than ours." The silence that followed was deafening. "That's absurd," my father finally said, his voice tight with anger. "We've given you every advantage. We've provided for you your entire life," my mother added. "I'm disappointed that you'd express such petty jealousy toward your cousin who lost her father at a young age." "This isn't about Rachel's loss," I insisted. "It's about how you treat us differently. You called her the daughter you never had last Christmas, right in front of me." My mother's face hardened. "You're overreacting and taking things out of context. Rachel understands our interests and values in ways you've never bothered to. Instead of complaining, perhaps you could learn from her example." That conversation confirmed what I had always suspected: in their eyes, I would never measure up to Rachel. After graduation, I threw myself into building my career in marketing, determined to succeed without their validation. I purchased my first apartment without their help, decorated it according to my taste rather than my mother's, and slowly built a life that felt authentically mine. Yet every holiday and family gathering reopened old wounds. Rachel continued to be the centerpiece of family conversations. Her law degree from Columbia. Her prestigious clerkship. Her perfect boyfriend from a good family. Meanwhile, my promotion to senior marketing manager received a passing acknowledgement. My relationship with Michael, a kind and brilliant software engineer who adored me, was met with lukewarm interest. "He seems nice enough," my mother said after meeting him. "What did you say his parents do?" At 27, I finally found the courage to limit my contact with my parents. I reduced my visits to major holidays and the occasional Sunday dinner. I stopped calling weekly and switched to brief emails updating them on my life. They barely seemed to notice. By my late 20s, I had built a successful career at a Boston marketing firm specializing in tech startups. I managed major accounts, led a team of 5, and had been featured in industry publications for innovative campaigns. My apartment, while modest, was mine, purchased without a penny from my parents, decorated with art that spoke to me rather than matching my mother's exacting standards. Most importantly, I had Michael. We met at a friend's housewarming party and connected instantly over shared interests in hiking, obscure documentaries, and a mutual love of Thai food. After 3 months of dating, I finally told him about my family dynamics. "They sound like narcissists," he said bluntly as we sat on my couch, empty takeout containers on the coffee table. "You know that's not normal, right? Parents aren't supposed to play favorites like that, especially with someone who isn't even their child." Hearing someone validate feelings I'd suppressed for years brought tears to my eyes. I used to think something was wrong with me, that if I just tried harder, they'd love me the way they love Rachel. Michael took my hand. "There's nothing wrong with you, Abby. You're brilliant, kind, and incredibly strong to have overcome that kind of conditional love." With Michael's support, I began therapy, working through years of inadequacy and rejection. Dr. Patterson helped me understand that my parents' behavior reflected their flaws, not mine. I couldn't change them, but I could change how I responded to them. "You're seeking approval from people who aren't capable of giving it unconditionally," she explained. "What would it look like to stop trying?" I reduced contact further, calling only once a month and visiting for major holidays. I set boundaries around conversations, changing the subject when Rachel became the focus. Sometimes it worked. Often it didn't. At 30, I brought Michael home for Christmas. Rachel was there with her new fiancé, Thomas, a tax attorney from a wealthy Connecticut family. The contrast in how my parents received our partners was stark. Thomas, Harold was just saying he needs a good tax attorney, my mother gushed. Perhaps you two should talk business after dinner. My father clapped Thomas on the shoulder. Rachel says you're on track to make partner at your firm. Impressive for someone your age. Michael received a firm handshake and cursory questions about computers that revealed my parents hadn't retained anything I'd told them about his specialized work in artificial intelligence. During dinner, my mother raised her glass. A toast to Rachel and Thomas on their engagement. Rachel, you've always been the daughter we never had, so mature and accomplished. Thomas, you're getting a remarkable woman. The room went silent. James, who had flown in from California, stared at our mother in disbelief. Aunt Margaret looked down at her plate. Michael squeezed my knee under the table. I set down my fork. I'm sitting right here, Mom. She blinked. What? I said, I'm sitting right here. Your actual daughter. The one you gave birth to. Not the daughter you never had. Oh, Abigail, she said with an uncomfortable laugh. You're so sensitive. I simply meant that Rachel is like another daughter to us. It's a compliment to her. At my expense. This isn't the time or place for your insecurities, my father interjected sharply. You're embarrassing yourself. Later that night, in the privacy of my childhood bedroom, I broke down in Michael's arms. I don't know why I keep coming back. Nothing changes. Because you still love them, he said softly. And you keep hoping they'll finally see you. He was right. Despite everything, I continued maintaining a minimal relationship with my parents, calling monthly and visiting a few times a year. I stopped bringing Michael to these visits to spare him the discomfort, and he understood. Rachel's wedding was a lavish affair at an exclusive venue in the Berkshires. My parents contributed significantly to the cost, something they mentioned repeatedly during the planning process. It's worth every penny to give Rachel the wedding she deserves, my mother told me over the phone. She's been through so much in her life. I was asked to be a bridesmaid but not the maid of honor. That role went to Rachel's law school roommate. Throughout the wedding weekend, I watched my parents beam with pride as though they were the ones giving their daughter away. Aunt Margaret noticed my discomfort and pulled me aside during the reception. I want you to know I see what's happening, she said quietly. I've tried talking to them about it over the years, but Eleanor and Harold, they've always been enthralled with Rachel. It's not fair to you and James. Why does she encourage it? I asked. Aunt Margaret sighed. Rachel learned early that your parents' approval came with financial benefits. After David died, we struggled. Your parents' support made a huge difference in her life, and she became expert at securing their affection. It didn't excuse anything, but it helped me understand the dynamic better. Rachel wasn't entirely to blame, she'd been a child who found a way to survive. My parents were the adults who should have balanced their generosity with consideration for their own children's emotional needs. In the months following the wedding, I focused on my life in Boston. Michael and I moved in together. My team landed a major client that put our agency on the map. James visited from California, and we spent a weekend reconnecting without the shadow of family drama. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was a rainy Tuesday evening in April. Michael and I were making dinner, he was chopping vegetables while I stirred a curry sauce, when my phone rang. The screen showed my father's number, unusual on a weeknight. Hello? Is this Abigail Mitchell? The voice was unfamiliar, male, official. Yes, this is she. Ms. Mitchell, I'm Officer Daniels with the Connecticut State Police. I'm afraid there's been an accident involving your parents. The wooden spoon slipped from my hand, clattering against the stovetop. Are they okay? His hesitation told me everything. They were involved in a serious collision on Route 7. They've been transported to Danbury Hospital in critical condition. I suggest you get here as soon as possible. Michael drove while I made calls, to James in California, to Aunt Margaret, to my parents' closest friends. I didn't call Rachel, assuming Aunt Margaret would handle that. My mind raced with possibilities. Critical condition could mean anything. People survived car accidents all the time. They would be okay. They had to be okay. We arrived at the hospital 3 hours later, having broken every speed limit along the way. A doctor met us in a small consultation room, his expression grave. "I'm very sorry, Ms. Mitchell. We did everything we could, but your parents' injuries were too severe. Your father was pronounced dead on arrival, and your mother passed away 30 minutes ago." The world tilted sideways. Despite our complicated relationship, I had never imagined a world without my parents in it. Never considered that our last interaction, a tense phone call about my decision to skip Easter this year, would be our final conversation. James arrived the next morning, red-eyed from an overnight flight. We clung to each other in the hospital corridor, orphaned adults overwhelmed by grief and regret. "I should have visited more," he whispered. I was still angry about everything, but I should have tried harder. "We both did the best we could with the relationship they allowed," I said, trying to comfort him even as my own heart shattered. Aunt Margaret arrived with Rachel, who wore designer black clothing that looked suspiciously new, as though she'd stopped for an emergency shopping trip on the way to the hospital. Her grief seemed performative, loud sobs that quieted when hospital staff weren't present, dramatic gestures that drew attention. "They were like parents to me," she told a sympathetic nurse. "I don't know what I'll do without them." I bit my tongue, focusing instead on the practical matters at hand. There were funeral arrangements to make, relatives to notify, my parents' house to secure. To my frustration, Rachel inserted herself into every decision. She had opinions on the funeral service, the flowers, the obituary wording. She positioned herself at the center of the arrangements as though she had greater right to decide than James and I did. Aunt Eleanor always said she wanted white lilies, not roses, she corrected me at the florist. Uncle Harold would have wanted a closed casket, she insisted at the funeral home. More disturbing was how many people at the funeral approached Rachel first, offering condolences as though she had lost her parents, not her aunt and uncle. Decades of my parents publicly treating her like a daughter had created this perception in our community. Rachel was so special to Eleanor and Harold, I overheard one of my mother's gallery clients say. Almost more than their own children. Each comment was a fresh wound over the still raw grief of loss. I found myself retreating further into silence, letting Rachel play the role of chief mourner while I handled practical matters behind the scenes. Michael remained by my side, a silent pillar of support. James flew back to California immediately after the funeral, unable to bear the family dynamics on top of his grief. A week after the funeral, my parents' lawyer called, requesting a meeting about the will. I expected a straightforward process, my parents' assets divided between James and me, perhaps with a small bequest to Rachel given their relationship. I had no idea what was waiting for us in that wood-paneled office, or how it would unravel everything I thought I knew about my family. The lawyer's office was in a converted Victorian house in downtown Hartford. Mr. Brennan had handled my parents' legal affairs for decades, a silver-haired man with wire-rimmed glasses and a formal manner. He greeted me with a somber handshake when I arrived, then ushered me into a conference room where James, Aunt Margaret, and Rachel already waited. Rachel had positioned herself at the head of the table, as though she were presiding over the meeting. She wore an expensive-looking black dress and clutched a monogrammed handkerchief that I recognized as one of my mother's. "Now that everyone is present," Mr. Brennan began, "we can proceed with the reading of Harold and Eleanor Mitchell's last will and testament." He opened a leather folder and put on his reading glasses. "This will was executed 6 months ago, superseding all previous versions." 6 months ago. The timing struck me as odd. My parents hadn't mentioned updating their will recently. "I, Harold Mitchell, and I, Eleanor Mitchell, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be our last will and testament," he read. The legal preamble continued for several minutes before reaching the distribution of assets. I half listened, my mind wandering to memories of my childhood home, wondering what James and I would do with it and its contents. Mr. Brennan cleared his throat. "Regarding the distribution of our estate, to our daughter, Abigail Mitchell, we leave the following personal items: Eleanor's collection of first edition poetry books, Harold's grandfather's pocket watch, and the sum of $50,000. $50,000? From an estate worth millions? I glanced at James, whose expression mirrored my confusion. To our son, James Mitchell, we leave Eleanor's collection of Japanese woodblock prints, Harold's vintage record collection, and the sum of $50,000. The room began to spin slightly. This couldn't be right. The remainder of our estate, including our primary residence at 47 Maple Street, all financial investments, retirement accounts, Eleanor's art gallery business and inventory, vehicles, and all other personal property not specifically designated above, we leave to our niece, Rachel Winters, who has been like a daughter to us and who we trust will honor our legacy. The silence that followed was absolute. I couldn't breathe, couldn't form words. James stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This is bullshit," he said flatly, then walked out of the room. I stared at Rachel, whose expression of shock seemed rehearsed, eyes widened, hand covering her mouth, but not a single tear disturbing her perfect makeup. "Mr. Brennan," I finally managed, "there must be some mistake. Why would my parents leave almost everything to our cousin?" He removed his glasses. "I understand this must be difficult, Ms. Mitchell. Your parents were very specific in their instructions. There's a letter they asked me to give you and your brother that might explain their reasoning." He handed me an envelope with my name and James's written in my mother's elegant handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Dearest Abigail and James **. If you're reading this, we have passed on, and you have just learned of our decision regarding our estate. We understand this may come as a shock, and perhaps even feel like a betrayal. Please know that we have given this matter great thought over many years *. Rachel has been an integral part of our lives since childhood. She has embraced our values, interests, and ambitions in ways that aligned perfectly with our vision for the future. While we have always loved you both, we must acknowledge that Rachel needs this inheritance more than you do and will carry on our legacy in the manner we desire *. Abigail, you have established yourself independently and have always charted your own course, often contrary to our guidance. James, you chose to distance yourself from family traditions and responsibilities. We respect your choices, but they have consequences *. Rachel has always been the daughter who truly understood us. She will ensure that what we've built continues according to our wishes *. We hope that in time, you will understand this decision comes not from a lack of love, but from a desire to preserve what matters most to us *. With enduring affection *. Mom and Dad *. The letter slipped from my fingers to the table. The carefully worded rejection was somehow worse than the will itself, this calculated decision to disinherit their children in favor of their niece, framed as though it were our fault for not being who they wanted us to be. "I knew nothing about this," Aunt Margaret said, her voice strained. "I would never have allowed it if they'd discussed it with me." "You didn't know?" I asked, searching her face. "Of course not," she insisted, though something in her expression suggested she wasn't entirely surprised. Rachel remained silent, her eyes downcast in a picture of humble acceptance. "I'm as shocked as you are, Abigail. I never expected this." But as she reached for the letter, I caught a fleeting expression, satisfaction, perhaps even triumph, before her features rearranged into appropriate solemnity. "I should find James," I said, standing on unsteady legs. "Mr. Brennan, we'll be in touch." As I left the room, I heard Rachel's voice behind me. "Mr. Brennan, when can we discuss the transfer of the house deed? I'd like to handle this transition as smoothly as possible." The eagerness in her tone confirmed what I already suspected, her shock was an act. Somehow, she had known about this all along. And I was determined to find out how. The week after the will reading passed in a fog of shock, grief, and betrayal. I took leave from work and stayed with Michael in Boston, barely eating or sleeping. James returned to California, unreachable except for brief text messages confirming he was alive. "You need to fight this," Michael urged as we sat on our couch, takeout containers untouched on the coffee table. "Something isn't right about the whole situation." "The will seemed legally sound," I said hollowly. They made their choice. A choice influenced by what? By whom? Your parents suddenly changing their will 6 months ago after presumably having a different arrangement for years? That doesn't raise red flags for you? His questions penetrated the numbness that had enveloped me. He was right, something didn't add up. My parents had always been traditional in their values. Despite our strained relationship, disinheriting their children in favor of a niece was extreme even for them. What would I even look for? I asked. Start with timeline. What was happening 6 months ago when they changed the will? Who was spending time with them? Were there any unusual behaviors or decisions beyond the will? The next morning, I drove back to Connecticut. My parents' house, now legally Rachel's house, was empty when I arrived. Using the key I still possessed, I let myself in, half expecting alarms to sound or Rachel to appear and demand I leave her property. The house was eerily unchanged, my mother's reading glasses still on the side table, my father's slippers by his favorite chair. I moved through the rooms methodically, searching for anything that might provide insight into their final months. In my father's study, I found his calendar. He had always been meticulous about recording appointments, using a leather-bound planner rather than digital alternatives. Flipping back 6 months, I noticed a pattern: lunch with Rachel every Tuesday, like clockwork. Additionally, there were several appointments with Mr. Brennan in the weeks leading up to the will signing, often followed by meetings with Rachel. Next, I checked my mother's computer, still set up in the sunroom she used as a home office. Her password had always been my birthdate, a irony that wasn't lost on me as I logged in. Her email revealed frequent exchanges with Rachel discussing the arrangement and ensuring everything is properly handled. Nothing explicitly mentioned the will, but the timing aligned perfectly with the will change. I printed key emails and photographed calendar entries before continuing my search. In my father's desk drawer, I found a business card for Danbury National Bank with a handwritten note: meeting with Thomas Reynolds, VP, regarding trust conversion. The bank was my next stop. I introduced myself as Harold Mitchell's daughter, handling estate matters. The receptionist expressed condolences and asked which banker I needed to see. Thomas Reynolds, please. My father had some business with him. Mr. Reynolds was a bald man with a booming voice who seemed genuinely saddened by my father's passing. Harold was a valued client for many years, he said after offering condolences. How can I assist you with his accounts? I'm trying to understand some changes he made recently. Something about a trust conversion? Reynolds frowned slightly. Yes, that was unusual. Your father had maintained trusts for you and your brother since you were children. About 7 months ago, he dissolved them and transferred the assets to a new trust with his niece as beneficiary. I questioned the decision given how long the original trusts had been in place, but he was quite adamant. My heart sank. Did he explain why? He mentioned something about honoring commitments and protecting family legacy. To be honest, he seemed uncomfortable discussing it, which wasn't like him. Your cousin was with him during that meeting, Rachel, I believe? Was this her idea? He hesitated. I couldn't say for certain, but she was quite knowledgeable about the details. She had prepared all the paperwork in advance. Your father just signed where indicated. After leaving the bank, I called James to update him. For the first time since the funeral, he seemed fully engaged. This is starting to make sense, he said. Remember Mrs. Sullivan? The housekeeper? Of course. I texted her yesterday, just checking in. She mentioned something odd. She overheard multiple arguments between Mom, Dad, and Rachel in the months before they died. She said Rachel seemed to be pressuring them about something, and once she heard Mom crying after Rachel left. Do you think Rachel somehow coerced them into changing the will? I don't know, but it's worth talking to Mrs. Sullivan in person. I drove to Mrs. Sullivan's modest home that afternoon. She had worked for my parents for over 20 years, cleaning the house twice weekly and occasionally helping with dinner parties. She welcomed me with a warm hug and tea served in my mother's second-best china that she'd apparently been given as a parting gift. Your parents weren't themselves these last months, she said, stirring sugar into her cup. Your father looked ill most days, not physically, but worried, you know? And your mother was drinking more than usual. I'd find empty wine bottles in the recycling on days when she normally wouldn't drink at all. And you overheard arguments with Rachel? She nodded. It started maybe 8, 9 months ago. Rachel would come over, all smiles when I opened the door. But once they thought I was gone or out of earshot, the tone would change. I couldn't hear everything, but she mentioned consequences several times. Once I heard her say, "You wouldn't want this getting out, would you?" Like a threat. Did you ever ask my parents about it? Once. Your mother said it was a disagreement about the gallery business. But the gallery was doing well. I've cleaned her office for years, I see the paperwork. Something else was happening. My next stop was my mother's gallery. The staff were surprised to see me, having heard the business would likely be sold. Rachel was just here yesterday, the assistant manager informed me. Taking inventory and reviewing the books. Did my mother mention any problems with the gallery recently? Any financial concerns? The assistant looked uncomfortable. Not exactly financial. There was an issue about 6 months ago with a particular artist. Your mother was very upset about it, but wouldn't share details with staff. Rachel helped handle whatever it was. Which artist? Marcus Reed. His exhibition was suddenly cancelled, all his work returned. Your mother had been excited about his collection, said it would be the highlight of the fall season. Then overnight, everything changed. I thanked her and left, immediately searching for information about Marcus Reed. His website showed he was now represented by a gallery in New York. I called and explained I was Eleanor Mitchell's daughter, interested in his work. I'd be happy to connect you directly with Marcus, the gallery owner said. He's actually here today for a client meeting. 30 minutes later, my phone rang. This is Marcus Reed. Lisa said you wanted to speak with me? Yes, Mr. Reed. I'm Abigail Mitchell, Eleanor Mitchell's daughter. A pause. I'm sorry about your mother's passing. Thank you. I'm trying to understand something that happened last fall. Your exhibition at my mother's gallery was suddenly cancelled. His sigh was audible. That was a difficult situation. Your mother was enthusiastic about my work, then abruptly claimed it wasn't a good fit for her gallery. Did she give a reason? Not directly to me. Her niece, Rachel, I believe, handled the communication. But through industry connections, I heard there were allegations about provenance issues with some of my pieces. Completely false accusations that could have ruined my career if they'd become public. I was fortunate to find representation elsewhere. Did Rachel make these allegations? Another pause. I can't say for certain. But the timing was suspicious. She'd approached me earlier about purchasing several pieces at a substantial discount, claiming she could provide valuable connections. When I declined, the problems with your mother's gallery began. The pieces were starting to fit together. After thanking Marcus, I called a friend from college who worked at the law firm where Rachel had been employed. Sophia, this is awkward, but I need to know if Rachel is still working there, and if not, why she left. Abby. I heard about your parents. I'm so sorry. She lowered her voice. Rachel left the firm about a year ago. It wasn't announced widely, but there were ethical concerns. Some partners believed she was using confidential client information for personal gain. Nothing was proven conclusively, but she was asked to resign. She told everyone she left to work at a more prestigious firm. That's not what happened. She was unemployed for months afterward. Word gets around in legal circles, no major firm would touch her. The picture was becoming clearer, but I needed more concrete evidence. I returned to my parents' house, this time focusing on my father's private files. In his desk, I found a hidden compartment containing letters in my mother's handwriting addressed to my father, dating back to before their marriage. The letters revealed a decades-old secret. My father had helped cover up financial impropriety committed by Rachel's father, David. Apparently, Uncle David had embezzled client funds while working at my father's investment firm. Rather than reporting him, my father helped conceal the crime and repaid the missing money to protect his brother-in-law and the firm's reputation. One letter, dated just after Uncle David's death, referenced this explicitly. Harold, I know you're worried about Margaret and Rachel's financial situation now that David is gone. I agree we should help them, but I'm concerned about how far this obligation extends. Yes, you protected David from legal consequences years ago, but that doesn't mean we owe them indefinitely. Our own children must come first. The final piece fell into place when James called the next day. I hired a private investigator to look into Rachel's finances, he said without preamble. You did what? I needed to know. The investigator found she's deeply in debt, maxed out credit cards, unpaid taxes, even a gambling problem. She was on the verge of bankruptcy before Mom and Dad died. Now suddenly she's wealthy. I told him everything I'd discovered, the dissolved trusts, the overheard arguments, the gallery incident, and finally, the letters revealing my father's protection of Uncle David. She was blackmailing them, James concluded. She must have found evidence of Dad's cover-up and threatened to expose him if they didn't make her their heir. We need to confront her, I said. And we need to do it where she can't escape the truth. We arranged the confrontation carefully. James flew in from California, and Michael took time off work to support me. We asked Rachel to meet us at our parents' house, her house now, to discuss some items we'd like to keep for sentimental reasons. She agreed readily, perhaps seeing an opportunity to appear generous by allowing us to take a few mementos from what she now considered her property. The house was transformed when we arrived. In just 2 weeks, Rachel had removed family photos from the walls, replaced furniture, and begun repainting rooms. It was as though she was systematically erasing all evidence of the Mitchell family from the space. I'm redecorating, she explained with a tight smile. Fresh start. We gathered in the living room, Rachel perched on what had been my mother's favorite chair, now reupholstered in a fabric she would have hated. Before we discuss items we'd like to keep, I began, we have some questions about the will. Her smile didn't waver. I understand you're disappointed, but your parents made their wishes clear. Did they? James asked. Or were they coerced? I don't know what you're implying, Rachel said, her voice cooling. But be careful about making accusations without proof. We have proof, I said, placing a folder on the coffee table between us. Bank records showing the dissolution of trusts that had been established for James and me since childhood. Testimony from bank officers about your unusual involvement in those transactions. Her posture stiffened slightly, but she maintained her composure. Your parents asked for my help with financial matters. There's nothing unusual about that. What about the artist whose exhibition you sabotaged at Mom's gallery when he wouldn't sell you discounted artwork? I continued. Or Mrs. Sullivan overhearing you threatening my parents about consequences if they didn't comply with your demands? You're creating conspiracy theories to explain a simple truth, Rachel said, standing. Your parents preferred me. They always did. I'm sorry that hurts you, but it's reality. Is this reality too? James asked, removing the letters from an envelope. Dad covering up your father's embezzlement? The crime that would have sent Uncle David to prison if exposed? The color drained from Rachel's face. For the first time, her composure cracked. Where did you get those? From Dad's desk. The same place you found them, I imagine. That's what this is all about, isn't it? You discovered these letters and used them to blackmail my parents into changing their will. The doorbell rang, interrupting the confrontation. James answered it, returning with Aunt Margaret. I asked Mom to join us, he explained. She deserves to know what's happening. Aunt Margaret looked between us, confused. What's going on? Your daughter blackmailed our parents, I said bluntly. She threatened to expose Dad's role in covering up Uncle David's crimes unless they made her their heir. Rachel? Aunt Margaret turned to her daughter. Is this true? Rachel's careful facade finally crumbled. They owed us. Do you have any idea what it was like growing up without Dad? Struggling while the Mitchells lived in luxury? Uncle Harold helped Dad steal that money, then acted like some benevolent savior by giving us handouts. Your father stole money? Aunt Margaret whispered, sinking onto the sofa. You didn't know? I asked. She shook her head. David told me the money came from bonuses and investments. Harold and Eleanor helped us after he died, but I never knew why they felt such obligation. Because Dad was complicit in Uncle David's crime, James explained. He helped cover it up to protect the firm's reputation and keep Uncle David out of prison. Aunt Margaret covered her face with her hands. All these years. Rachel's expression hardened. When I found those letters, I finally understood why they favored me all those years. It wasn't love, it was guilt. So yes, I made sure they compensated us properly through their will. They owed us that much. By threatening to destroy Dad's reputation after his death? I demanded. By holding their lives hostage? They made their choice, Rachel said coldly. The will is legal. You can't prove coercion. Actually, Michael spoke up, under Connecticut law, a will procured by duress or undue influence is invalid. The letters, bank officer testimony, and Mrs. Sullivan's account provide substantial evidence of both. Who are you to give legal opinions? Rachel sneered. Before switching to software engineering, I practiced estate law for 5 years, Michael replied calmly. Your position isn't as secure as you believe. Rachel's confidence visibly wavered. You'd drag your parents' reputation through the mud with a public legal battle? Expose your father as an accessory to fraud? It was the question I'd been asking myself since discovering the truth. Was justice worth the cost of exposing my father's mistake? We don't need to make this public, James said, surprising me. We can resolve this privately, with a mediator. Why would I agree to that? I have everything. Because if you don't, I said, we'll file a police report about your blackmail scheme. Extortion is a felony in Connecticut. The threat hung in the air between us. Additionally, I continued, we'll notify the Bar Association about your ethical violations, ensuring you never practice law again. Aunt Margaret finally looked up, her face streaked with tears. Rachel, enough. What you've done is unconscionable. We're going to fix this. Mom, you can't seriously. I said enough. Aunt Margaret rarely raised her voice, and the sharp tone silenced Rachel instantly. These are your cousins. My sister's children. We're going to work this out fairly, without destroying what's left of this family. 3 weeks later, we reached a settlement through mediation. The house would be sold, with proceeds divided equally between James, Rachel, and me. My mother's gallery would go to her assistant manager, who had worked there for 15 years, with profits from the sale split between the 3 of us. The remaining assets would be divided 60% to James and me, 40% to Rachel. It wasn't what our parents would have wanted, either their original intention or their coerced decision, but it was fair, and it avoided a public legal battle that would have tarnished everyone involved. Rachel and I haven't spoken since the mediation. Aunt Margaret calls occasionally, her voice heavy with the weight of dual betrayals, her husband's crime and her daughter's manipulation. James returned to California with a new determination to build a relationship with me, his only remaining close family. The most difficult part of healing has been reconciling my complicated feelings about my parents. They were deeply flawed people who made terrible mistakes, both in covering up a crime and in their conditional love toward their children. Yet going through their belongings, I found evidence of love I hadn't recognized, photos of my graduations displayed in my father's office, articles about my marketing campaigns saved in my mother's desk, birthday cards I'd made them as a child preserved in an album. Perhaps they loved us as best they could, limited by their own flaws and the weight of old secrets. Michael and I used part of my inheritance to buy a house in a quiet Boston suburb. In the backyard, we planted an oak tree in memory of my parents, not to glorify them or erase their mistakes, but to acknowledge their place in my story. I've learned that sometimes those we love most can hurt us deepest. That family isn't always defined by blood or legal documents, but by those who stand beside us through our darkest moments. Most importantly, I've learned that my worth isn't determined by someone else's ability to see it, not even my parents. It's something I carry within me, undiminished by their failures and unbound by their limitations. If you've ever felt betrayed by family or struggled with conditional love, I hope my story helps you find healing. Remember that you are enough, exactly as you are. Like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share your own experiences in the comments. Sometimes the family we choose becomes more important than the family we're born into. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you strength in writing your own.